She arrived on Earth convinced the humans were exaggerating their own survival stories. The air was thin but breathable, gravity tolerable, architecture charmingly inefficient. As an alien diplomat from a species that prized physical resilience and ceremonial composure, she took one look at human cities and decided this assignment would be effortless. Cultural exchange, a few speeches, maybe a polite dinner, then home. She even smirked at the briefing that warned her not to overdo it on her first day. Humans, she decided, were fragile creatures who needed warning labels for existing. Naturally, she resolved to experience Earth properly. All at once. It started with food. She'd been told humans bonded through shared meals, so she ordered what the waiter proudly called a triple-loaded street platter. Grease pooled, sauces burned pleasantly, and something labeled extra spicy made her eyes water. She powered through it, refusing to show weakness. Her internal translator flagged rising body temperature and accelerated circulation, but she dismissed it as excitement. Humans ate this daily and survived. Mostly. Then came the gym. She passed one while walking and scoffed at the idea of paying to suffer indoors. Still, curiosity won. Inside, humans strained and grunted under what her species would classify as light resistance toys. She tried several machines, ignoring the concerned glances. Her muscles adapted quickly, but the constant pressure, repetitive motion, and unfamiliar posture triggered warnings she'd never felt before. Heat built. Tightness followed. She laughed it off, assuming this was what humans meant by a burn. The final mistake came from clothing. Wanting to blend in, she accepted the advice of a cheerful shop assistant and bought what were apparently good jeans. The fabric was stiff, narrow, and alarmingly confident about where it intended to sit. She had to lie back to pull them on. The mirror reflected a shape that humans clearly admired, judging by the look she received, but every step felt increasingly compressed. She told herself this was fashion. Humans suffered for aesthetics. It was practically a religion. By mid-afternoon, the novelty wore thin. Walking required focus. Her stride shortened. Heat pooled uncomfortably low, and a dull swelling sensation made itself impossible to ignore. Her internal diagnostics scrolled alerts she'd never seen outside battlefield simulations. Localized inflammation. Fluid retention. Pressure sensitivity. She paused on a sidewalk, pretending to admire a building while quietly panicking about why her legs suddenly felt like they were negotiating with each other. Humans passed by without concern. One even smiled and asked if she was enjoying Earth. She forced a diplomatic grin while calculating how many steps she could take before something truly embarrassing happened in public. Each movement worsened the sensation, turning mild discomfort into something heavy and distracting. She tried lengthening her stride. Bad idea. She tried standing still. Worse. The irony hit her hard. She had survived toxic atmospheres, hostile negotiations, and ritual endurance trials. Now she was being defeated by food, exercise equipment, and pants. By the time she reached the diplomatic housing complex, she was sweating, not from heat, but from effort. Walking had become a careful, deliberate act, every step sending an unwelcome reminder of the swelling between her legs. Her translator attempted to categorize the feeling and failed, helpfully labeling it unprecedented. She finally stopped moving altogether, leaning against a wall and exhaling sharply. Pride warred with reality. She could not, under any circumstances, contact her superiors and explain that Earth had incapacitated her below the waist. The report would be archived forever. Mockery would be eternal. A human security officer noticed her frozen stance and asked if she needed medical assistance. She opened her mouth to refuse, then tried to take a step and nearly buckled. The officer's expression shifted from polite to alarmed. That decided it. As she was escorted toward medical services, half carried with what the human called professional concern, her thoughts spiraled. This was not how first contact dominance narratives were supposed to go. Earth had not challenged her intellect or strength. It had simply squeezed. And whatever was happening between her legs was no longer something she could walk off. The human intern medic learned two important things within the first 30 seconds of meeting her. First, alien diplomats were taller in person. Second, nothing in his training prepared him for an alien diplomat glaring at him like he personally invented embarrassment. She was half supported on a mobility chair, posture rigid, jaw tight, eyes sharp enough to audit his soul. He introduced himself calmly, voice steady in the way interns practice to hide terror, and pulled up her file while pretending not to notice how carefully she was holding her legs together. He asked routine questions. She answered with clipped dignity, translating symptoms into diplomatic phrasing that avoided admitting weakness. Localized swelling, she said, as if it were a political inconvenience. Mobility impairment. Unexpected. His tablet chimed, linking her species profile, and immediately suggested consulting the interspecies medical appendix. He swallowed. The appendix was legendary among interns for being old, vague, and full of phrasing that sounded alarming out of context. He followed protocol anyway. As he examined the readout, he explained everything aloud, professional and precise. She listened, then tilted her head slightly. His words, pressure, inflammation, sensitivity, translated through her cultural filters into something far more personal. She narrowed her eyes. "You speak very directly for a healer," she said. He flushed and clarified that humans value transparency in medicine. She smirked and replied that humans were braver than their reputation suggested. The manual recommended rest and elevation. He repeated this, gesturing to the bed. She raised a brow and asked if humans usually invited diplomats to recline so soon. He froze, then awkwardly clarified again. She complied, stretching out with exaggerated slowness, watching his face the entire time. The swelling made movement difficult, and she did not hide her discomfort. Each adjustment earned a wince she failed to suppress, which he interpreted medically and she interpreted as concern that bordered on admiration. He fetched loose clothing as suggested, human sweatpants, several sizes too forgiving. The manual described this as reducing constrictive stimuli. She laughed softly, asking if this was a traditional human courtship offering. He nearly dropped them. After a frantic explanation involving circulation and fabric tension, she accepted them with theatrical seriousness, remarking that Earth rituals were surprisingly intimate. The next recommendation involved warmth and hydration. He brought tea, explaining its anti-inflammatory properties. She accepted it, eyes never leaving him, and commented that humans were attentive caregivers. He replied that it was literally his job. She countered that intention mattered. Their conversation drifted into dangerously flirtatious territory entirely by accident, each of his clinical reassurances colliding with her cultural assumptions. When he said the swelling was nothing to be ashamed of, she went very still and asked if humans often reassured patients in such personal terms. The manual warned that symptoms might temporarily intensify before improving. Unfortunately, it was correct. Within minutes, the swelling increased, heat flaring sharply enough that she hissed through her teeth. She tried to stand, then sat back down hard, pride shattering. He reacted instantly, steadying her with hands that were firm, careful, and entirely professional. Her breath caught anyway. She accused him of doing that on purpose. He denied it so quickly it sounded suspicious. He read further, brow furrowing. Advanced cases, according to the appendix, required direct monitoring and responsive intervention. He did not like how vague that sounded. She, on the other hand, leaned back and asked whether he was prepared for such responsibility. He muttered something about supervision and protocol while feeling deeply betrayed by the people who had written this manual decades ago. By the end of the assessment, she could no longer stand at all. The swelling between her legs had turned walking into an impossible negotiation. She stared at the ceiling, cheeks warm with humiliation, then glanced at him. "You will fix this," she said, not as a demand, but as a statement of trust. He nodded, heart pounding, realizing that whatever the manual suggested next, he was about to be very, very careful. By the time the intern finished reading the next page of the manual, he no longer trusted it, the people who wrote it, or the concept of interspecies preparedness as a whole. The phrasing grew increasingly unhelpful, drifting from medical clarity into something that sounded like advice from an overconfident uncle. Terms like responsive handling, attentive presence, and manual judgment encouraged glared back at him. He cleared his throat and decided to interpret everything through the safest possible human lens. She noticed his hesitation immediately. Aliens of her rank were trained to read pauses the way humans read facial expressions. "You look uncertain," she said lightly, though her grip on the bed tightened. "Is that part of the treatment?" He answered too quickly, insisting that uncertainty was normal during complex cases. She smiled, amused and unconvinced, and remarked that on her world, hesitation from a caretaker usually meant interest. He attempted to redirect the conversation toward comfort management. Ice packs, according to the manual, were recommended under the poetic description of controlled thermal counterpressure. He explained this as calmly as possible while placing one near her, careful to avoid any suggestion of impropriety. She inhaled sharply at the temperature change, then laughed under her breath. "You humans really do believe in extremes," she said. "First heat, now cold. Is confusion part of the healing?" The swelling responded slowly, stubbornly. Her legs remained immobile, and the weight of the situation pressed in on her pride harder than gravity ever had. She joked darkly about diplomatic consequences, about returning home with a report titled Earth, surprisingly hazardous below the waist. He laughed before realizing she wasn't entirely joking. When she admitted that her species recorded physical failures permanently, the humor drained from her voice. He reassured her, firmly, that this was temporary. Humans hurt themselves in far worse ways daily and still insisted on jogging the next morning. As the hours passed, their forced proximity shifted something subtle. He grew more confident, less frantic, relying on observation rather than the cursed manual. She noticed. She commented on it, too, teasing that he was settling into his role. He replied that humans adapted under pressure. She murmured that she could feel the pressure quite clearly, then watched his ears turn red. The silence that followed was thick with unspoken interpretations. Medication was next. Anti-inflammatory tablets translated into her language as something alarmingly close to swelling suppressors of intimate regions. She raised a brow and asked if humans always named their medicines so honestly. He nearly choked and blamed the translator. She took the pills anyway, trusting him despite the embarrassment, despite the indignity of needing help to lift the glass. Eventually, frustration cracked her composure. She snapped at him, accusing him of enjoying her vulnerability. He stiffened, hurt flashing across his face, and replied that he was doing everything he could. The tension hung between them until she sighed, shoulders sagging, and admitted she was scared. Scared of being remembered like this. Scared of being helpless on a world that wasn't hers. The anger melted, replaced by something softer and far more dangerous. He sat beside her then, not touching, just present. He told her that humans didn't define people by moments like this. That embarrassment passed. That bodies failed sometimes, and it didn't mean anything about worth. She listened quietly, eyes fixed on him instead of the ceiling. When she finally spoke, her voice was low and sincere. "You are different from how your species describes itself," she said. He smiled faintly and replied that humans were bad at advertising their strengths. He closed the manual at last. Enough was enough. Common sense said rest, fluids, loose clothing, and time. No dramatic interventions. No heroic nonsense. He explained his plan clearly, confidently. She agreed without hesitation, adding that she was placing her mobility in his hands. The way she said it made his pulse jump, but he ignored it. As the swelling finally began to ease, just slightly, she exhaled in relief. It wasn't over yet, but it was improving. She looked at him with something like gratitude and something like interest, and he realized that whatever happened next, Earth had already made one undeniable impression on her. Recovery, it turned out, was deeply unimpressive. There was no dramatic surge of alien biochemistry, no ceremonial intervention, no heroic last-minute procedure. The swelling receded the way most human problems did, slowly, stubbornly, and with an irritating lack of spectacle. She hated that it worked. She hated even more that he had been right. Hours passed with quiet conversation filling the space where panic had lived earlier. He checked vitals, adjusted pillows, offered water with the practiced ease of someone no longer doubting himself. Each small improvement loosened the tension in her posture. When she finally shifted her legs without flinching, she froze, testing the sensation, then laughed, a sharp, surprised sound that felt more vulnerable than anything she'd said all day. "I can feel my feet again," she announced, as if declaring a diplomatic victory. He smiled and told her that circulation was a beautiful thing. She snorted and replied that humans found romance in the strangest places. With help, she swung her legs over the side of the bed. Standing was awkward, careful, but possible. She steadied herself, refusing his hand at first out of pride, then accepting it when gravity reminded her that recovery was not a straight line. The contact was brief, professional, and still charged enough to make them both notice. She pretended not to. He pretended harder. The outdated manual was officially declared useless. He placed it face down on the counter and promised to submit a report recommending its removal. She suggested it be launched into space as a warning to future civilizations. They shared a laugh that felt earned, the kind that came after shared embarrassment and mutual survival. As mobility returned, so did her confidence, but altered now, softened at the edges. She admitted that humans were nothing like the projections. Too calm. Too adaptable. Too willing to admit when something simple worked better than something impressive. He replied that humans rarely won by being the strongest. They won by refusing to panic and by fixing problems with whatever was on hand. She considered this, then nodded slowly, as if revising an entire species profile in her head. Before she left, she changed back into her diplomatic attire, abandoning the jeans with open hostility. She declared them an Earth hazard and demanded they be classified as restricted equipment. He agreed enthusiastically. When she stood fully upright without wincing, she tested her balance, took a confident step, then another. The swelling was gone enough to be manageable, the memory lingering just enough to ensure she would never forget this visit. At the doorway, she paused. Diplomats were trained to close interactions cleanly, but she hesitated, studying him with an expression that mixed curiosity and intent. She thanked him, not formally, but personally, for treating her like a person rather than a problem. He replied that it had been an honor. She smirked and suggested that next time she visited Earth, she might choose a slower itinerary. He said he'd be happy to offer guidance. "Supervision?" she asked. "Strictly recreational," he answered before he could stop himself. Her laughter followed her down the hall, confident and amused, the sound of someone who had learned something valuable and slightly dangerous. He watched her go, heart lighter, pride intact, already aware that this would be the story everyone would ask about later. The day a human intern treated an alien diplomat with nothing but patience, common sense, and a refusal to overcomplicate things, and somehow left her walking away impressed, intrigued, and very interested in coming back.